I want to actually quickly segue into our panel discussion this evening on building an AI and AI research and academic ecosystem. Prerna, do you have any comments that you want to make before I start?
Yeah, I just wanted to, call on our panelists before we begin the panel discussion. And it is a panel which will be joined, where Dr. Anandan and Professor Larry will be joined by Dr. Rajesh Gupta and Dr. Uday Desai for building an academic and research ecosystem in AI. Dr. Rajesh Gupta is a professor and director at Data Science Institute, University of California, San Diego. Professor Gupta's research is in embedded and cyber physical systems with a focus on sensor data organization and its use in optimization and analytics. Dr. Uday Desai is the professor emeritus and founding director at IIT Hyderabad in India. Dr. Desai's research interest is in Internet of Things, cognitive radio, wireless sensor networks, and cyber physical systems. Professor Larry will be moderating this discussion. Over to you, Dr. Larry.
Thanks very much, Prerna, for those introductions. And thank you, Uday and Rajesh, for joining us this evening, as well as Anandan for this discussion. I think I want to kick off with a kind of a general question, which is the word ecosystems come up a lot. Ms. Anna Roy brought it up as well in her presentation, and I think it was implied in a lot of what Anandan talked about in terms of deployment and systems thinking. What makes a research ecosystem in AI and maybe technology broadly different from just the point excellence of individual institutions or individual research efforts? And why does it matter to have a research ecosystem? And what role can academic institutions play in building and making them successful? Perhaps I can start with Anandan.
Thanks, Larry. I mean, there are, I would say, broadly, two major parts to, I guess three major parts to this, right? One is being able to do the innovation or research. The other is the capacity to turn them into usable, scalable products and solution. And the third is really, regardless of whether it's social sector or commercial sector, and access to the market. And below this, you want to have some ecosystem, especially for AI, that would have a way of getting the data and being able to use the data and share the data and so on. And I think this is just my way of thinking about it, and I'm not sure, it may be oversimplified, but still, if you look at things that way, I think India is really poised for a big leap in both the commercial world of AI and in social sector. The data ecosystem is actually weak when it comes to social sector. The interplay between the three sector segments is also weak. In the commercial sector, I believe it's already taking place. And I think, a lot of the new startups that are coming up in India, as far as I know, are very much AI oriented in one way or the other. And, I'm a product of IIT, as is Uday and many of the people here. And I do believe now, compared to say 20 years ago, IITs are very much moving into a research mode. And of course, we have IISc, which is India's premier science research institution. So we are kind of poised. I do think that, as the links are closed, it can take off. So.
Thanks, Anandan. Rajesh, maybe you can talk a little bit about, so San Diego is not exactly an isolated place, but it's not the largest tech center in the US either. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what you see as the challenges of building a local ecosystem, perhaps.
So an ecosystem, thank you, Larry, for inviting me to the panel. When we think about ecosystem, especially research ecosystem, it really consists of flows, a flow of people, flow of talent. So when you have an ecosystem of, let's say, an academy and industry in a particular domain, you have a talent pool that comes in and for training at the academic institutions, finds its place in the industry, and comes back again into the academia. Now, in order to create a flow of talent, you need talent to train talent. And so what it takes to build the ecosystem is really attracting talent first. The institution for the ecosystem consists of three things. I normally call it PPMs, people, place, and money. And what that means is talent. Are you able to attract the best talent in creating that ecosystem? The second is the place matters. And place, I don't mean just geographically, but the resources that it brings in. Now, in the areas that we're talking about, the resources are actually not only just knowledge or data or even people, but also the context in which that research is done. So, for example, in San Diego, when we set out to build a data science ecosystem, we took a holistic view of the area, not only of the university and the different areas which were represented, but also local companies. We created a local parallel organization that works out with the industry that sort of provides internships to our students, provides data sets, provides correction methods, provides ways to look at the results of the research and a validator of that research. So that brings it together. And I will skip the discussion on money side of it, but it is also an ingredient when you are building an institution.
Thanks, Rajesh. Uday, perhaps we can talk a little bit about what you see as the current state of the AI data science research ecosystem in India, and where is it strong, and maybe what you think needs to be done in the next 2 to 5 to 10 years.
I would say the AI ecosystem in India is evolving. Okay, we have just started. We are a little late entrant into the game. I think maybe China and US were far ahead of us in some sense, but we got into it. I mean, in some sense, in the strict sense of the word, maybe 2018, 2017. Around that time frame. Of course, one should keep in mind there were many like me who were doing a lot of AI research, so-called artificial neural networks, way back in the 90s. So we have graduated enough masters, PhDs, and lots of theses. But then ANN had its, one might call it the winter. I mean, kind of it went down, and Lee Kun's paper suddenly woke everybody up. And we took a little longer to kind of get into our act after Lee Kun's paper. I think we should have done it much earlier. Okay, so I think it is evolving now. Ecosystems don't get formed overnight. Okay, it takes a long time. The example I would give is if you look at computer science. Okay, and perhaps Rajesh was, if I'm not mistaken, one of the first batches of CS from IIT Kanpur. I'm not too sure of that. He can clarify on that.
I was electrical engineering, but
electrical. Yeah. Okay, so 1980s is when the CS started at that time. Okay, and if you look at it at that particular time, there were, that's when computer science became a formal kind of a degree granting department in India, and all IITs started at the same time. And it took a while for the CS ecosystem. In fact, if you look at CS department in the early days at IITs, which are the premier in the country, along with IISc, they were all electrical engineers. I'll give my own example. When I came back to in '87, I taught a course on control systems in the CS department at IIT Bombay. Okay, today CS department wouldn't touch that course with a 10-foot pole. Perhaps because of CPS, it may have something. But in a sense, essentially, they were electrical engineers who were kind of interested in computers and things like that. It took, I think, about 20 years to really get a genuine CS ecosystem in the country. Okay. And also the second part, which I think India has not recognized, in my opinion, and I think we say a lot, this is our Y2K moment. If you recall, the Y2K moment is what launched information technology, and India became, quote unquote, the software hub of the world, and everybody came. And essentially, today it's, I think, numbers vary, $120 billion to $150 billion IT industry is what India has. Okay, and bulk of it is the revenue coming from outside. So we have to recognize this and kind of get into it a little quickly. Unfortunately, in India, we are always slow to take off. We have a lot of discussions, a lot of debates, a lot of white papers, and I think, at times you have to take your bets. And I think we can learn from the US in some sense. You don't keep kind of postponing your bets. Then somebody else will take it and you lose out. Now, coming to the actual present situation, if you look at it, the academic institutions today are doing very well. Okay, in a sense, I do take pride in the fact that when I was the director of IIT Hyderabad was perhaps the first institute, maybe in India positively, perhaps in the world, to start a BTech program in AI. So CS was a separate program, and this became a BTech program in AI. We got actually very good rankers from people who applied to IITs for admission to it in the very first batch. Moreover, what happened after that, many colleges started, and I think I have been sort of advising several private institutes and others to start a BTech in AI. Okay, and then what we call AICT, All India Council for Technical Education, which is in fact the body which kind of looks at a lot of academic institutions in the country, barring IISCs and IITs and NITs and etc. etc. They formed a committee, and today any college which is NBA accredited, that is National Board of Accreditation India, okay, if they can accredit a college, they can start a program in AI and data science. Okay, that's the name they have chosen. Now, though in fact some people objected to the name and the acronym turns out to be AIDS, okay, but they said anyway we'll go with AI and data science. Okay, and today, so what my feeling is, it will take about 4 years to have a large population, young population of AI and data science graduates. Again, one should keep in mind the early batches of AI and data science are going to be leaning much more heavily towards computer science. That they are going to play a major role out here. But soon, I think the things will develop. What we need right now to really get the ecosystem going, academics are there. Okay, a lot of research is being done. Of course, sometimes it's like I keep joking. It's like old wine in a new bottle. Every computer vision person today calls himself an AI researcher. So I think that's like promptly you kind of relabel yourself. Why? Because that's the in thing. That's where you get your money. If you say you're a computer vision person, you may not get the funding. But industry has to come in. I think our industry, though talks about it, is relatively slow in takeoff as far as AI is concerned. Okay, and I think if industry can take off, okay, the ecosystem can really progress very well, and we can really get a big thing. So little bit of things are done. See, another thing which I have a contrarian view out here. Okay, in India we get too hung up on low-hanging fruits. I think you have to do that, no doubt about it, to get the buzz going. Today there is a buzz of AI. The buzz is there. That is no longer an issue. I don't have to go and preach for AI. Fact is, people have to start doing things both at the high level and at the low-hanging fruit level. So I would say that I'll stop at this particular point. Otherwise, and as they say, don't give an old professor a microphone.
Okay, thank you for giving that perspective from the academic side in India. Anandan, maybe you could say a little bit about, from the perspective of somebody you've had a distinguished research career, of course, but after Yale, I think you went into industry and carried out your research in that setting. Maybe you could say a little bit about how you see the AI research ecosystem in India from the perspective of somebody who was a founding director of Microsoft Research in India and also now is at Wadhwani.
Yeah, I would agree with quite a bit of things. I should mention though that back in the days, some of us started as AI research PhDs and became computer vision researchers.
Now you're going back.
Right.
I think back. I remember when I came to India in 2005 to set up MSR India. The number of PhDs graduating out of all of India in computer science was about 35. It wasn't valued as a path, kind of a growth path. Anyone who wanted to do PhD back in our days went to the US or some other country and did it. But then in 2005, many of them were simply going to IT companies and weren't even thinking about PhDs, and a lot of professors would bemoan. I think the numbers are much better. Uday would know the statistics, but it's certainly more than 500 plus annually. I mean, and I'm including computer science as a broad discipline. It's really great to know that, in fact, now we are specializing BTech in AI itself. But Uday is right. Until about now, AI came somewhat slow and late to India. I mean, I think perhaps the dominance of IT and Indian industry was known for certain capability to do software development and software engineering, and has been often called the back office of the world and so forth. But that success might have perhaps a little bit hindered progress in investing or extending a lot of interest in AI. I also, again, when I came back in 2017, 2018, AI was very sparse. I think you could count the number of AI experts either in academics or industry, probably less than 50 or something like that. And I mean, there were a lot of people who might be doing low-level work, but people who maybe not even just PhDs, people who have experience in building. But even in the 2 years, that number has rapidly grown. I don't have statistics for it, but seems like it's here. And I think I should say credit the government with thinking of AI as a national priority, and the bully pulpit always helps. But again, congratulate Uday on pioneering the BTech program in AI. But now it seems like it's an important thing. But more interestingly, and what I found, and this is certainly something, in the research ecosystem, I noticed in the US also, right? As you said, Larry, I went from being an assistant professor to Sarnoff, where it was a contract research lab. So it was semi-industry, but everything we did was applied to Microsoft Research. But then, although Microsoft Research was not doing product development, part of a big company, and what I realized ultimately, to sustain the momentum and the depth and the capability for innovation in academic research, you really need a strong industry along with it, especially in applied fields. And I'm not talking about physics or mathematics here. And I think what's interesting in India is that there is a huge startup fever. And I don't know what percentage, a large percentage of it seems to be about AI, which is not a bad thing. And we see, now, with companies like Google, Microsoft, Amazon increasing their AI, that matters. And I think, companies like Ola and Flipkart very much depend on AI for their work itself. And Geo is certainly another example in the same vein. So I think we are beginning to see, the industry seeing opportunities. We're beginning to see a startup ecosystem. A lot of it would be naive and wrong and will fall by the wayside. But I do think that I do think that it can actually inspire and motivate. And just because I got the opportunity, I should do a little pitch for the social sector. Of course, in the social sector, it is very different. We find that the lack of the understanding of AI and its use is very, very weak, and yet there is a lot of need, and I think it's going to take significantly more time to create a more vibrant ecosystem of AI players in there. So,
Anandam, thank you for those perspicuous comments. Rajesh, this is a good segue, I think, to the question of what the role of academic research and development should be in building such an ecosystem. Anandam alluded to the fact that AI, faculties are pretty small. I mean, a big lab in computer science in an academic institution is, 3 professors and 15 graduate students is a big lab. I mean, a relatively big lab actually, and so what can, whereas a company like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, not to mention something like Reliance and Geo, have many orders of magnitude, larger numbers of people and more money to actually work with. So what do you think the role of academic research and development can be inside of given the scale of industrial and commercial research and development at this point in AI and data science?
So Larry, if you want to understand the role of academia, first you have to take a view of AI ML that is not simply a technological advance. And I think that's what I've heard also in some of the talks here. You really have to think of the science of AI and ML. And that science really adds 2 new dimensions. When we think of science, we think of understanding of the natural world. The natural world was the same, whether it was in the West or in India or anywhere else. And therefore, there was a lot of common basis for that advance to happen. But when it comes to the science of AI or science of data science, there are the word of us, that means you and me, what we think, what we intend to say, what our language expresses, and the word we build, whether it is artificial word of buildings and roads and electrical system, or the word of our social networks. And understanding of those requires understanding of, for example, causal relationships, understanding of the subtext, understanding of the natural language. All of that is science. And that science, when you put that into AI and ML, there is no industry group that would actually take that on. And it's like asking why we need to do computer architecture research if Intel is building all the microprocessors. So the role for academia is there, and we can expand upon it as to how that comes in. But let me address the context of India first and why it makes it so special. We definitely share the natural world with the rest of the world. But if you look at the spiritual basis, if you look at the literature basis, the richness of India, it just remains undiscovered. And when you look at that richness and you couple with the logic of the questions, whether they're intuitive or logical, that our spiritual tradition gives you, it gives you a totally different landscape in which to do this work. And that, by the way, is something that in India, we can do quite a bit more. Now, what is India strong at? When I look at it from outside, of course, I'm in awful admiration of what Uday has been able to do. And Anand and I was happy to see Vadvani in KDD, and that sort of exposed to me as to what the institutions are coming up. When I served on the jury of Infosys Prize, I was also able to look at the talent in algorithms and computer science and databases. I can tell you, when it comes to the theoretical computer science, when it comes to algorithms, when it comes to databases, when it comes to statistical analysis, India has some of the best talent already. And Microsoft has built network systems group, for example, that is very strong. Then what is missing? What you're missing is connection between the dots. For example, the talent that is in statistics or in theory or algorithms really understands about life or understands about biology or even intersects with it. Now, you need ways in which organizations that will put the researchers that look at radiological images, for example, that look at microscopic images, and actually make sense out of them. The TV pictures that, for example, Anandan showed. So one of the first infrastructure we are building at UCSD is not one of compute, we already have that. Not one of cloud, we already have that. But one of microscopy, light sheet microscopy, cryo microscopy, electron microscopy. And why? Because they are the new lenses through which the algorithms look at our world. So I think that opportunity exists. I think there is right now more promise, just looking at it from outside, than there is reality of where India actually is today. I'm chairing KDD conference this week. India, the number of papers from India is 1/10 of the number of papers from China. There is no obvious reason why that should have been the case. So we are looking at that, and I think that's the. Hopefully, that answers your question as to what the role of academia is.
Thank you, Rajesh. I'll take the moderator's privilege of saying, when I think about this myself a little bit, I was reminded of some of the things that Ms. Anna Roy said at the beginning about finding a distinctive role if you want to make an impact in the world. And it's certainly the case that, I have many of my students working at places like Microsoft and Google. They work in much larger environments than they were trained in or educated in. And, the way I've been successful, to the extent I have been successful, or any of us in academics, I think, is if you see Google going in a certain direction, it's not that you go in the opposite direction, but you try to find a right angle to it to go in. You have to go, and that's really a part of what academics is for, is to get a little off the beaten path, and keep looking for the new fields. That's kind of, anyway, that's my philosophy. Otherwise I'd probably just go work for Google. That was a great answer, though. I really appreciated that. Maybe this is a good segue to that question of what India can contribute specifically and perhaps even uniquely to the development of AI and the data science as disciplines. And I'm not sure they're exactly the same discipline, by the way. I think they share a lot in common, obviously. But maybe, I think that totality of what we've come to so far has talked to this a little bit, but maybe we can be more explicit about what we think India specifically can bring. And I feel a little abashed, obviously, in raising this question. I'm not the person to answer it very clearly, but I'm fascinated to sort of participate and think about what that answer could be. So maybe Uday, you could say a little bit about what you think there.
Yeah. So you're looking at what? I mean, missed the key question in the discussion.
Well, what can India contribute uniquely to the development of AI
Sure.
and data science
Okay.
as disciplines?
I think a lot they can contribute. And let me say 2, 3 things out here. One is India is perhaps the richest country as far as data is concerned. I think Anna Roy also mentioned in a thing. But unfortunately, I mean, just given the diversity that we have out here, you look at if you want to do natural language processing, there is no other country which can offer the challenges that India can offer. The number of languages that we have, and in some sense, if you were to look at spoken language only, roughly every numbers vary. Every 200 kilometers, things will change. I mean, many times we may have difficulty understanding a person who's 200 kilometers away if he talks in the dialect of that particular region. So it's extremely complex, and the same thing happens in various other things. Even if you're doing face recognition, we probably have faces of all kinds. I mean, in the sense when you go from north to south and from east to west. Okay, so it's but unfortunately, our data is. I'm going to be a little blunt out here. People have said that I'm blunt, and I keep my tradition alive. Is in a mess. Okay, we have not kind of properly documented the data, and spent enough time. It is an expensive exercise. It is also time consuming. Okay, and it has to be done. Nobody, of course, sharing of data, I'll come to it in a minute. Okay, in a sense, data is very private. People are not going to share until they get their, their whatever, they can monetize it. And when there's not much value, they'll put it up for others to use it. But even before that, our health records, even right now when COVID is going on, we have phenomenal amount of data out here. Okay, and things vary as you go from region to region, even in the same state. Now that data is not properly documented. In principle, it's all there. Okay, I know doctors, I know about hospitals, I interact, and it's all there, but not in the format where we can. So annotation of data, cleaning up the data, making so that is like I would say hard groundwork. India can really contribute, and that will become a great driver for AI. That's the first part. Now, one of the other things which India will have to do, because a lot of data is each hospital has a data. We have thousands of hospitals. They are not going to share data with anybody. I wouldn't share if I was the owner of that hospital. Okay. Now the point is, we need to. This is a very technological challenge. If I had a PhD student, and if I were really a active professor, I would kind of look at that. How to create a data sharing protocol, perhaps using blockchain. In fact, this idea came up. I was talking to somebody with, I think, Shell Oil Company, and we met in Bangalore at a conference. So how to do the data sharing protocol without giving away your data and the identity of the data, not just identity. Okay, so my data is my data. That should remain. Okay, maybe blockchain is the method of doing it. Okay, so there are ways in which I think this requires very significant kind of research, and this has to be done by academics. I agree with Rajesh on that point. Academia has been the driver for any technology. I mean, I jokingly say when people talk about AI and application, I said, without Claude Shannon, there would not be any communication today. Right? All of us are in business because one man from an academia, Bell Labs was academic at that particular time. Later on, he moved to MIT. So you need such I mean, Claude Shannon is Claude Shannon. Not everybody can make that kind of contribution. So, so that is one particular thing, data sharing protocol. Now for AI, what I feel is we need to build not just computing devices. That of course India requires a lot more. Something like UC San Diego has phenomenal heavy computing facilities. Anna Roy talked about cloud-based computing. That is very good. Okay, but all said and done, what my experience has been in academia, even as a director, every researcher somehow wants to have some computing of his own. I remember we were planning to we will be getting an HPC at Hyderabad. Still, someone in CFD wanted their own computer cluster. So this is good enough. I don't need HPC. I will do why? Because he had full control over it. He could do whenever he wanted, night, day, anytime. So I think we need to not just computing. That is one particular part, but we need to build labs where we can play with AI. What I mean by industrial automation, for example. Now that requires a fair amount of investment. It's not just buying a bunch of computers. I may have to buy automobiles, autonomous vehicles. Okay, we need to build labs for that. Microscopic, as what Rajesh talked about. This is amazing. I don't think in India people are looking at such labs for AI. Peripherally it may be there. Okay, so this is what I would say, that labs where the young minds have a chance to fiddle, play, doodle with AI. And I think unless we give that opportunity, see, I'm a big believer in unstructured education. This is what happens, I guess, when you kind of when you are, past your normal teaching career. In the early days, you're all structured. As you get older, suddenly you realize the value of unstructured education. What we need to create, we have created now structured education in AI. That will go on. I mean, I don't have to spend much time on that. But we need to now create unstructured education in AI. Okay, where kids can literally, walk in, play with it, break things, etc., etc. And I think this requires much more heavy investment, both of equipment and breakages will be there, and manpower, because you have to maintain those labs. It's not just buying and keeping it out there. Anybody who has had a lab which has a lot of heavy duty equipment, the maintenance sometimes takes up much more effort than buying and installing it. So I would say that is something which is very much required to create that AI research thing. The third thing which I will say, and again I'm a little contrarian out here, most people when they talk about AI in India, I mean, including I would say the Niti Aayog report, and I don't mind even talking to Dr. Saraswat and Amitabh Kant and Anna Roy over there. We just focus on application. I think India also, and as Rajesh said, today we have the mind. It is not like what Anandan was saying, maybe 30 years ago. There are enough good PhDs. Many have come back from the US and settled out here, working in India at IITs, at Microsoft Research, at Wadhwani Foundation, other places. Okay. We have to also have enough funding for fundamental AI research. In a sense, it can be done. It's not going to be done very easily. There may be few doing it. For example, when Maninder Agarwal at IIT Kanpur came up with a prime factorized polynomial prime factorization algorithm, it made big waves. Even today, a lot of credit is given, but it is just one case in point. We need such things to flourish a lot more, like what happens in the US. So I think we should not ignore high-end research in AI at academic institutions. Academic institutions are thought leaders. And our job is to inject thought into society, which society will then pick it up and make workable things out of it. If we are going to spend time on doing workable things, what is the industry for? Okay. At least that's my opinion. I'll stop it.
I'm sorry.
If I can add a couple of things, if you don't mind. See, I think one of the things, right, is that the reality is that today there are two aspects of doing AI where industry has a significant advantage. One is data, and the other is compute. When you have to do these things at scale, industry is naturally advantage, and because it's continuously collecting data, and a lot of the AI systems are in real time, learning and collecting data, and that requires, that sort of a play where you have a product that gets deployed and collects data and so forth. On the other hand, industry, by and large, is driven by business goals, shareholder concerns, end of the year reports, and will ultimately its investments and priorities will be set according to that. I mean, there are enlightened companies now, of course, and when they become large and monopolistic, they can afford to do those things. However, that is not true. Certainly, Indian industry is nowhere in that, disposed nowhere in that way, simply because they are not both neither visionary nor are they capable in terms of their scale. Actually, Reliance and Jio may be an exception to this, the way they are going. And that's where I would soundly agree that we do need the research and the new directions and the innovations and the what you call the lateral thinking is going to happen in universities, especially in India. I mean, in the US, you find a lot of good PhDs running off to industry. I'm sure you being in academia has felt the challenge in hiring people and seeing people leave. In some sense, that's actually perhaps less true in India because the opportunity to do that kind of research is less available in India. So therefore, it's really important to use that situation to our advantage to deepen our research capabilities in India. So I think that's.
So Larry, let me add a couple points here. Is looking at India and the state of ecosystem there. I think India is an undiscovered country, not by the outsiders, but by the insiders. And what I mean is that the much of the art history, much of the language history, much of the literature remain buried in terms of what the relationships are, what the world of humans was like, and that world needs to be brought out in a manner in which it connects to uniquely Indian um, cultural and social lives. That's where the AI and ML will actually be most effective. Um, the radiological imaging, the natural world, which we share with the rest of the world, there are many advances which I think Indians would rightly make technological advances and deploy them in their context. But the original research will require connecting the dots from the science of information, from the science of the natural world to the science of our cultural aspirations, of our language traditions, and the things that normally go under, for example, NLP and text mining today. Uh, Good news is that we do have the educational background, whether it's mathematics or computer science. We do have the teachers and the talent who can form the base. But you are missing, or at least looking at it from outside, this convergence of PPM in a place where actually this talent works, next to a doctor, for example, or next to a practicing doctor or an MD, PhD to make that happen. And I think that is something that you would need an academic institution to do that. If there is a large scale industry that is supporting, that's really great. And if I could say necessary ingredient, but it's definitely not sufficient.
Thank you all for those wonderful comments. Actually, I should say, Rajesh, in regard to what you just mentioned, that Geo Institute's digital library actually is going to be devoting significant resources to uncovering and curating the cultural treasures and history of India in literature and the arts, and that's part of the mission of the institute as it goes forward. So I think you're absolutely right that there are actually deep connections between AI and data science on the one hand, and these sort of cultural touchstones and foundations on the other hand. I think we're going to go to some questions in just a minute from the audience. And thank you so much for your attention, all of you. Just to maybe quickly sum up some of the things I heard, I was taken by Uday's discussion of. Well, go ahead, Uday, and then I'll.
Okay, this is a sort of, we must also thank the government for doing a lot of things. Often we don't do that enough, and since I'm kind of the chair of that particular committee, Anand is a member out there. We have set up a program which is already kind of going. Money is being released for cyber physical systems. It's about a $500 million program. Okay, and we are going to set up something like 25. Already, everything decisions have been made. 25 hubs, what we call technology innovation hubs in the country. Each hub will have a spoke, and they may also have spikes. Some smaller colleges may also be involved in it. The rough funding for each hub, in the Indian context, varies anywhere from something like, maybe about $12 million, to something like about $20 million, maybe even more, $25 million. So old institutes like say, IISc Bangalore and IIT Bombay or IIT Delhi, they will get close to $25 million over 5 years, while younger institute Hyderabad may get about maybe 12, $15 million. Some triple ITs may get maybe $8 or $10 million. So this is a very massive project. A lot of that has to do with AI, though each hub is going to focus on a specific vertical. Okay, and in a sense, this is a big initiative. And another big initiative is coming up. I think soon. I think government will probably make an announcement for launching again a big activity in AI with a sizable amount of funding. I can't say much about it because I'm not even privy to it, but I know things are happening. I think in some sense, Anna Roy kind of alluded to that. So the cabinet has to take a decision. I think because of various other imperatives, it's getting a little delayed. So government will be investing sizable amount of funding, in promoting AI. Of course, right now, most of it is at academic institutions like IITs, IIScs, and the likes of it. So there will be a very vibrant AI data science activity happening in the country with all possible verticals like agriculture, autonomous vehicles, healthcare, AR, VR. You can think of all kinds of other things which are there. I mean, Anandan, I chair that committee. He's a member. We have gone through, I don't know how many hours and hours of discussion. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity for seeing this.
No, Uday, thanks for those comments, actually. And the role of the governments in India and in other parts of the world is one of the many questions that we didn't get to, the things we thought about talking about during this discussion. We could go on for another few hours if the audience would indulge us. I will say that it's certainly the case that in the United States, where we've gotten to an AI is really in large part, not exclusively, but in large part the result of more than 60 years of government investment. Much of which, over much of its period, probably looked like a waste of money to a lot of people, which turned out not to be a waste of money. So I think that's really that's part of the lesson there. I think it's time to go to the audience, and Prerna, take it away.
Yes, thank you so much. That was really enriching, and it definitely helped me understand how different players in the ecosystem, from government to industry to social sector, academia and research, have this interplay and are bringing really the best, at least in India. I'm really looking forward to the challenging times and the exciting times ahead. With this, I'll be sharing a few questions from the audience. There are a few that are for Dr. Anandan from the previous session as well. So I'll take a few of them first, and then we'll move to the panel questions. We have a question on how can we incorporate causality to improve deep learning? Dr. Anandan.
Let's go to the easy questions first.
That's the real.
I think it's if there was a question, it's one of the state-of-the-art questions in AI. Frankly, I mean, I know whoever asked the question clearly knows what they are talking about, because at the moment when we look at deep learning networks, it's often hard to tell how they are doing reasoning. It seems to be a little bit of a magic that's happening, and whereas causality, and I'm going to extend it a little bit towards traditional inference. Right, and how do you see the traditional inference and things like statistical, way of thinking about causality? How do you unify them? If when I finish all of this and I go back to academic research, I'll tell you how I'll do it. But it is an open question in AI. I won't pretend to know the answer here.
Well, if I can actually quickly
forward his name to Anandan, I'm sure he'll hire him for asking a beautiful question.
Larry made about this actually, yeah.
I noticed that the birth weight application, for example, seems to be somewhat model-based in terms of how it's operating, and maybe that's an interesting. It didn't look like it was just point a neural network at the babies and estimate their weight. It looked like there were some underlying parameters of 3D modeling that were involved in computing them.
So maybe I can interject here a little bit. That there are three kinds of problems that AI/ML solves. One is detecting patterns, and those patterns could be through generative or discriminative means. Definitely through deep learning, what is known as deep learning today, for image, speech, and text. The second group of problems are what you would put them under making decisions. And those decisions can be recommendations, it could be others, and so on. So when you start to talk about inference or causality detection, and again, with the notions of causality that might be mathematically construed, then you are trying to take the methods of pattern detection and apply them into decision making. And I think that is an emerging area. There are probably 4 different sessions just on that. There was a whole day-long tutorial on causality and deep learning. So it is definitely a hot area in academics, as you call. The third area, which is sort of very, very nascent, and there are a lot of questions on that area, and that has to do with predicting social outcomes. I think the biggest question mark in those areas are there. When you look at a resume, how do you predict the performance? And I think there's a bit of a magic thinking going on in the community that those problems can be solved. I think those are the hardest problems that probably will take decades to solve, if at all.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much once again. So the next question is how AI can apply to design Swachh Bharat Abhiyan machine automation with specialization to municipality corporation all over India.
Yeah, so I think, I should probably take that question. I actually break this question into two parts, right? One is talking about the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, which of course, I'm not going to explain here, everyone knows. And when you say about automation, I think what really is meant is that how can we make that mission be more effective through bringing automation in various aspects of maintaining what do you call a sanitized, clean neighborhood environment and so on, right? But one of the things that we learned is that you have to really go into particular use cases within that broad problem. So, for example, when whatever we have done, we look at a cascade or a system of care. So, Swachh Bharat may be anything from having better toilet facilities to what do you call the sanitation system in a city in terms of how it's managed and so on. You usually pick one point to start and understand which point can actually be where you might have the most amount of how do I say impact or bending of the curve that can happen through bringing any kind of an AI technology. So I think it will require a detailed analysis, but frankly, I think given this is another of these areas where fundamentally our capacity to address the problem is much less than the size of the problem, right? Because we can't maintain clean rivers or clean canals. And I'm living in Bombay. Plenty of evidence is one of the hidden blessings of COVID is that our streets have been and our environment has been cleaner as a result of the behavior that we are doing. It was ironic, but I think you have to take a particular one of it if you want to make sure that you meet the river and the canals. How do you actually detect when it's polluted, and how do you bring in the right type of care? You can go into, but you have to go into particulars.
If I may come in, I'll give a contrary. We shouldn't use a sledgehammer to kill an ant. Today, what's happened? Anything and everything you want to use AI. I think if you want to do Swachh Bharat, in fact, the reason I'm saying is yesterday I was there at Hussain Sagar in Hyderabad and looking at how to tackle pollution of Hussain Sagar. I mean, this is just a coincidence that this question came up today. Okay, the whole afternoon I spent out there. Anyway, I won't get into the details out there. Fundamentally, there are simple things that we need to do. We have to invest money in treating effluents. There is no rocket science out there. We are not doing that. And you must have seen pictures of Ganga near Hardwar. Okay, suddenly it is crystal clear, like Anand was saying. Why? There are no effluents going in. So my feeling is for Swachh Bharat, there are some basic things. Let's first do that, then bring in AI. Okay, so I think it's like AI. Just let's not have an approach where this is what has happened sometimes. Everything and anything you masquerade as AI. And I think sometimes my worry is that in the long run it will do a disservice to AI because it may not really solve what can be solved in a straightforward manner.
Yeah. I mean, again, in my talk, I mentioned the 7 questions that we ask, right? Yeah. And those will eliminate a lot of the use cases right away. So you have to go through an analysis like that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Okay, with that silver lining of COVID-19, I segue to the next question, which is how will India tackle the huge requirement of skilled manpower that is required for AI? And what are the initiatives that are taken by the government for this, or even the private sector or the institutions? So over to you.
Okay, shall I tackle that? Being from academia?
Okay.
So, two things. One, what I already mentioned during the panel part, already now BTech programs have started in AI and DS. Okay, so that will create a manpower. It will take for another 4 years to get it. Okay. Now, on the other hand, a lot of activities are going on skilling for AI. There are private organizations and academia. In fact, I'm consulting for one of the companies in Hyderabad called Talent Sprint. Okay, so they are running a program with Triple IT Hyderabad. They are running a program with IIT Hyderabad. They are also looking at running programs with other academic institutions like IIM Calcutta, IISc Bangalore, IIT Kanpur, etc. So Talent Sprint is one such organization. There are many such organizations in the country where a lot of skilling and training is going on. The programs will vary from 4 weeks to 6 weeks. And again, the programs are graded. It could be for fresh graduates, the guys who are in the 4th year of the graduation. It could be for people who have been working for 2 to 3 years. It could be for mid-career people who want to shift because, whatever they had learned is now not quite relevant. They need to learn AI in order to go up the career ladder. So yes, the scale is not as much, Ministry of AI and Ministry of Skilling is already there. They are doing it. If you talk to NASCOM, NASCOM is doing it. If you talk to METI, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, they are also doing it. So there is a fair amount of activity. Unfortunately, in India, the scale required is such high that many a times, you educate maybe 2 lakh people. Okay, 2 lakh looks like a drop in the ocean in India. Okay, I mean, you skill 2 lakh people, 200,000 people. Sorry, I should say it in the common this thing. So 200,000 people, if they are skilled over the next, for the say, past 2 or 3 years, doesn't look like a large number in the Indian context because of just the scale at which we need to do things. But there is a lot of activity going on. I think a lot more is required. And in this particular instance, I would say that academic institutions should partner with startups and SMEs. No, we have incubated these companies. The talent skills was incubated by Triple IT. Okay, so I think similarly, I think there are, in fact, one of the movie moguls, Ronnie Screwvala has started I think many of people living in India might have heard of Ronnie Screwvala. Okay, so he has started a company dealing with education. In fact, he had approached me when I was the director of IIT Hyderabad. Okay, so there are some others also. We need, I think, academic institutions should partner with them and really go on a massive, large-scale skilling activity in the country, which is very much required. Because everybody need not necessarily become a hotshot researcher. We do need Python coders also. Okay, it's not that we only need great thinkers in AI. So it is going on, but the scale has to move up. I would say at least 5 to 10 times.
So maybe I can make 3 quick comments here that I think are, because this is a problem not just for India, but of course the whole world. The first thing I want to say is just locally and parochially, Geo Institute, of course, hopes to do its part in developing great AI and data science talent in India and for the world. Second of all, I think that people should keep in mind when they get themselves educated that the goal of computer science in general and AI specifically is to automate. That's the ethos of the field in some sense. That's the mission of the field. And so you should always be thinking about what that I'm doing right now is going to be automated 10 years from now. And I think that's actually a really critical thing when you think about your education or think about what you're doing is that everybody in their entire life is going to be moving up sort of a career ladder, moving away from things that are sort of easily scalable and easily replicable towards things that are less so. And then the silver lining in this is that it actually, I think one of the great discoveries of AI is that almost every single thing that human beings do applied to a specific situation often involves a heck of a lot more contextual understanding and reasoning than it looks like to the uninformed eye. I mean, it looks like so many of the things that we do are simple and they're not so simple. So that's really the silver lining for us as the machines pick up the work that can be automated is it turns out there's just a huge amount of that will always be kind of at the cutting edge that's hard to automate.
It seems to me that looking from outside, that India is not the question, but it's the answer. But it is missing a catalyst of some kind. It needs AI and machine learning more than any other countries, maybe perhaps China, because the scale of the problems require those solutions compared to the Western societies. So copying Western societies and taking their lead is probably the wrong way to go about it. And I think Anandan's talk already illustrated so many examples where you look at the problems from its inherent view. And I think, that just scales up when you start to look at healthcare or even transportation and so on.
I think, by the way, in this regard, that the dream of giving a wonderful education to every child in the world has been actually a strong dream of computer science and AI, maybe from its inception, that this would be one of the great challenges for the field was to actually help provide that kind of education for everybody, something we're still very far from, actually.
Or you make sure you teach them linear algebra. You make sure you teach them statistics in high school and programming.
Yeah, so I would say one of the, compared to the US, one of the things I felt about growing up in India, and it's still true, is the value of STEM education is quite high. I think math is really taught, and I think that certainly will help. And of course, by the sheer size of the large population, we simply have a lot more people who are capable of very quickly coming up to speed and learning these methods and so on. I'll make one pitch for this, which is in terms of, there is such a opportunity for India to lead the world in terms of addressing the class of problems that the rest of the world is not addressing, which is the social sector problems, right? No other country in the world is poised to do it. The countries which have a lot of the problems, other than India, don't have the technology infrastructure or the education system or the capacity to do it. And the richer countries don't have the problems. So India does have a unique opportunity to be much more out of the box and creative. I mean, Indian. I think the talent growth in India should certainly pay attention to that. So there may not be a lot of money there.
I'd like to add two things here. One is, if you look at the new education policy, what Rajesh was referring to, they have talked about teaching, in fact, AI at a certain mid-school level and even programming in the early school. So the NEP, and now the question of implementation is a separate issue altogether. As a policy, as a document which has been approved by the cabinet, so what you're referring to has been included in it, so they have heard it. Okay. The second thing, what Anandan was saying, I think what we need to tackle even social problems, many times we need collaborations. And I'll give examples. For example, there are two big projects that at IIT Hyderabad that I'm involved with. In fact, today morning only we had a meeting on one of them. Are with Japan. Okay, one was on reducing the carbon footprint by doing data science analysis on multimodal transportation in India. No other country probably has this kind of a transportation mechanism in India, where from literally people go from bicycles on the same highway all the way up to nowadays even a Mercedes car. Okay, normally things are fairly segregated if you look at the West. So this is a big project, all of it is funded by Japan. And a part of it is what they call JICA, many of the, and it's a 5-year project. Okay. Another one that we have, and I had a meeting, in fact, just about a week ago, is on data science for farming systems, again with Japan University of Tokyo. And we are looking at some very complex things out there using AI and data science out there. I don't have time to get into the details in this. But my point is that, though that project is funded by DST partly for Indian researchers and JST, that is Japan Science and Technology department, for the Japanese researchers. We need to create these collaborations. And these have to be, what I like about the Japanese collaboration, they're not looking at 1 year, 2 year faculty exchange, going there, spending 2 months here, 3 months here. Both of these are 5-year projects, so you can get some results. Otherwise, it's like, just kind of needling here and there. My feeling is that maybe Geo can take a lead out here, because the problem can be tackled much better. And I'll give examples, like we need certain kinds of drones to do some of the agricultural researchers. But for the Japanese help, we would not have been able to get those drones. We needed a hyperspectral camera. I mean, we were struggling, all kinds of import restrictions, this, that. But for Japanese help, we would not have gotten a hyperspectral camera. And there are many such examples. And also, you can learn from each other. So my feeling is that this international collaboration, and Geo already has it, so you have a head start in it, can actually take a leap forward in identifying projects where researchers in India, in your case, with the researchers in the US, you have Shamu who is in France, okay, work together. I get the young ones, the PhDs, and can you imagine the kind of interaction that can happen for the youngsters when they meet each other and spend time together? So this is, I strongly believe in that. I mean, we cannot tackle this problem totally on our own.
I think one thing I'm tempted to say is that if an AI can function successfully in India, across India, it'll be smarter than any other AI, because we have to deal with completely unpredictable environments. We don't have autobahns driving a self-driving car in Bombay. I feel sorry for it, actually. And we have diversity, like Uday said. We have cultural and language diversity richer than any other place in the world, and we have impoverished data environments. I think if you want to really tackle hard AI problems and be successful, you got to do it here.
Well, I have felt very safe in my visits to Mumbai, except when crossing the street. So I hear what you're saying. I should say, by the way, that as far as collaboration, I do intend to be in India for a large part of the year next year myself, and teaching at Geo Institute. So look forward to getting to know many of you much better at that time.
Yeah.
Prerna, where else do we go?
Yeah, wonderful. Actually, it's great that you all are actually anticipating questions that are coming in. And with this, I have my last two questions. Partially, for one of the questions is already answered by Professor Desai. So the next question is: in India, industry academia collaborations are not as thriving as they are in the West. In such a scenario, how can institutes build ecosystems? What are sustainable business models in this regard? And the last question, excuse me, is how can we tackle the data privacy issues? How close are we to develop the data governance laws?
Let me
Well,
say, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Those are
Let me
big
just say one part of the question on the ecosystem with industry. That problem is not just common to India, it's also common here as well. We know high performance, high profile engagement, but there are many others. So one of the things we have done here is the data science as an area actually requires practitioners to work with the students. So we have created opportunities for the industry partners to actually have office hours and actual appointments within the institute itself. And so they hold office hours with the students, they meet and they do their projects there and so on. They might even be in the classrooms. So the teaching is not just by professors or TAs to the students, but your industry partners, especially senior engineers, are part of the ecosystem. So that's a strategy that has been giving quite a bit of results. And in fact, it was actually used in early years of semiconductor industry as well. And it does require effort in all societies. And so the grass may be greener on this side, but it's really not all that.
That brief.
Let me take up the first question a little bit, and Uday will certainly have a point of view based on his experience as a professor and a director. See, I think the challenge with the industry academia collaboration in India goes a little bit beyond the two systems. It actually has to do with whether Indian industry is even focused on innovation. Traditionally, it has not been. Traditionally, it's been about sort of addressing a certain consumer need and all that. The whole idea that industry should actually create new innovations and technologies has not been a part of Indian development. I mean, I'm not. I would say I can understand. Given our short history, 73 years, and we had to get where we got to, etc. But I think that will have to change in order for industry academia collaborations to thrive in India. Industry has to step up to where they value academy and research and innovation as a key part of their survival, not as just an extra to do. But one thing about AI is that AI has innovation very inbuilt into it. I mean, you may have a certain deep learning technique, but once you start applying it, you end up having to do all kinds of innovations in order to make it work. It's not as much a plug and play as some other technologies might be. And I think therein some opportunity lies. But ultimately, I think it goes to the fact that Indian industry has to ramp up to a greater level of innovation, in my opinion.
The industry, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'll add two things out here. One is the industry. See, this is a debate which perhaps I've been involved with, with ministers chairing it, for the last, I would say, at least 12 to 15 years, and much more so during my time as a director. And as Rajesh correctly pointed out, even a couple of times with the minister, I had the opportunity to go on the delegation to US, to Israel, to UK. Same discussion comes up. Okay. So as he says, he put it very nicely. It looks like the grass is greener on the other side, but it is not that green. Okay. But we need to do a lot more. The problem, in my opinion, at least in India, I understand a little better, not as much in the US, is what I call, being an academician and again coming from a control background, problem of time constants. See, the industry time constants are very short. They go quarter to quarter, right? Every quarter, the industry is displaying the results, and they need some things. And having worked with HP Labs for 2 years, I have some perspective on how things keep changing a little more. While academics don't go by quarter to quarter, we work on a much larger time constants. And if you look at a PhD thesis, it's 4 years. Maybe in India it's a little more. In US it could be 3 years. Okay, so this is where the problem comes in when the two want to interact. That is, one comes and says, "I want the results at the end of 6 months," and the professor says, "What do you mean 6 months?" That's like, I have another 70% of my job takes up everything. Almost 80%. Where am I going to give you in 6 months? So I think somewhere, we need to meet and understand. And I think that a lot of debates are there. There are panel discussions. They've all gotten together. My feeling is it will get resolved. Okay. And in fact, my good friend Naushad Forbes with Forbes Marshall is one of the leader in this. My other good friend, BVR Mohan Reddy, who started Science, okay, he's also in it. And all of us keep debating when we meet. How, in fact, just about a couple of months back, Mohan Reddy had called up. He says, how do we increase this? Okay, so this is going on, and this will go on in for some more time until, as far as the data is concerned, your second part, actually, India has not done that badly. Sometimes we don't realize it. If you look at the what they call the India stack, we have solved the identity problem with Aadhaar. I think we have perhaps the biggest database in the world with Aadhaar. I think now it is about 1.2 billion or 1.1 billion or something like that. Aadhaar cards have been issued. What is next big thing is payment. If you look at UPI, it is one of the most unique payment interfaces, that unified payment interface that has been developed in the world. Okay. Again, it deals with data, financial data. I mean, all of us use Google Pay out here, at least in India. I mean, assuming Prerna probably has Google Pay. Okay. And it works so smoothly. I just need a phone number of the other guy, and boom, and essentially everything goes through UPI. You need your UPI pin code to do the transaction, isn't it? This is what UPI has done. Okay. So, and what I was told, this is Nandan in one of his talks mentioned it, that apparently Google has written a letter to the State Department in the US to implement something equivalent of UPI in the US. So for a change, what we did out here has generated some waves in the United States. The reason I'm saying is that many times we should be a little proud of something we are doing. We're always criticizing ourselves. And I think we should look at that. And the third level that they're working on is your data privacy business. That's the third in a part of the stack. There are three layers to the stack: identity, payment, and data part of it. That is currently being worked on. The last I heard Nandan about maybe about 8 months ago, he says we should be having it. What I meant by Nandan Nilekani, for those who don't know him, I think he should be known to everybody, in my opinion. That will come. I think it's a matter of maybe another 6 months. COVID would have slowed down the things, but my feeling is another 6 to 8 months, max 1 year, we will have that stack also. There is some data privacy bill which is already there in the annual. It is going on. I mean, I was part of the discussion of some of the committees at one point. The ministry is forwarding it. Okay, so that privacy bill is also going to come. My only worry with bills sometimes are they put too many handicaps in terms of doing things, like the drone bill that is there, etc. So I hope the freedom is there, but I think we will have a good the whole layer for data as to how data will move from one to other. Your medical data can be shared, like from one hospital, I can share with another hospital without revealing the identity, everything, anything else, but the data can be shared. Currently, it's a big problem. If I go to one hospital, then I go to another hospital. I don't know how it's in the US. How do you share that data? So this was one example which I talked about. But it will come in, and we are on our way.
I'll just say one thing. The American companies do not do innovations for the sake of innovations. If they could get away with their marketplace without innovation, believe me, that's what they would do. They do it as a survival strategy. Now, there are other nations, whether Singapore or Europe, where sometimes the tax policy drives them to innovation simply because there are tax implications. So public policy can get in the way, get and supportive in this area. But really, at the end of the day, if it is about your survival, and I think that survival applies in India too, and there is quite a bit of competition there as well. So the AI, whether it's text miner systems, whether it's chatbot systems, whether it is, these things will come up. There is no question about it. I think the issue really is, I think this is what you started this panel with, is what is the right ecosystem? And I think in that ecosystem, you're missing a few catalysts. And one of those catalysts is actually in academic organizations that take the lead. And when I look at it from outside, IITs and ISC and so on, I do see a lot of followership of the academic leadership of the West, and not really so much more as to what I've seen in China, for example, where there are whole schools of cybersecurity built in, or there are whole schools of this. And while we should not do that because there is no such thing in US, and I think that's something that India needs to break out of. At least the Indian mindset needs to.
So with that, we come to sorry, Dr. Anandan, you want to share something?
Just a quick, so Larry, I think one thing I'm reminded is, when we were young professors, we started doing AI with the problem of solving the question of the mind. the science of mind. But today AI is so hot and so applied. I'm not sure who's actually thinking about those questions anymore. Maybe in India, given that we can operate at a different pace, we have an opportunity to work on those kind of things also.
I think, in fact, this is one point I wanted to make. I'm glad Anandan kind of implicitly brought it up. I think for the next breakthrough in AI, the AI researchers need to collaborate with researchers who are working in brain and cognitive science. So if you look at, for example, there's a big center at IISc, and other IITs are having a small activity, but this is funded privately by Chris Gopalakrishnan, one of the founders of Infosys. And he's given a huge sum of money in the Indian context, about 200 crore plus. Now, I'm not sure even within IISc whether AI researchers are collaborating with this particular center out here. The reason I know a little more is, I know Vijayalakshmi Ravindranath, who is the head of it. Also, one of my former student, SP Arun, he works out there. Okay, so I think the next breakthrough will come when the brain researchers or the researchers start talking to AI researchers, and I think things will happen there. Magic will come there.
Thank you so much for the. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to
no, I was about to say, I know one such person who is, who is working at the CASP, and that is our Dr. Shailesh Kumar, who's definitely working in brain sciences. And I would like to call upon him for sharing some concluding remarks. And he's the chief data scientist at Geo and has been recognized as a leading data scientist in the country. He's also been leading the development of AI platform that will have applications in healthcare, agriculture, education, retail, telecom, to name a few. And we will have a masterclass with him at a later time where he can share a lot more. But just to give a teaser, I would request him to share his remarks. Thank you, sir.